I'm Carol from Sunbury, Ohio. I'm a Republican, but I don't care who does the job as long as the job gets done. That's why I like Sherrod Brown. He stood up to both parties on China and worked with Republicans to fight fentanyl because Sherrod fights for Ohio. That's leadership.
Paid for by Friends of Sherrod Brown.
Have you ever stood in the doorway of a room that felt really important, heart pounding, trying to decide whether to step in or walk away? Think about it, because this is more than just a physical space. It's a metaphor for the choices we make in life. The high-stakes job with the corner office that chains you to a desk. The relationship that's lost its spark. The dream that once lit you up but now feels more like a dark cloud. How often have you mistaken persistence for passion or comfort for contentment? I remember vividly the wrenching in my gut as I clutched my phone, about to text back a message that would end a decade-long friendship. It was one of those bonds that started out full of laughter, but over time just turned to struggle, miscommunication, really just misalignment. But it left me wondering, who are we to each other now? If I'm being honest with myself, I had actually held on a few years too long, convincing myself that the time invested was a reason to stay. But the cost was just too steep. Peace of mind, authenticity, the wild laughter that had initially held us together. And when I finally let go, it was an ending that came without closure, without the neat little bow to wrap up years of shared history. Here's the sting though. Endings are common. Closure, on the other hand, not so much. When we cling to the need for a neat conclusion, we tie ourselves in knots. It's like trying to decode the last note in a song that stopped playing. But what if our attachment to the idea of closure is actually holding us back? And what if it's this uncomfortable, sometimes painful process of evaluation that true freedom, or even our own personal evolution, can really be found? And maybe it's because, as tough as it is to face, walking away from something or towards something new can be just the thing that sparks our self-discovery. Whereas staying put often requires us to stay who we were. The problem is, most of us don't just have a fear of change. We have this whole narrative around quitting, as though it's some form of failure. And these lies can keep us stuck in rooms that we've long outgrown. So how do we turn down the noise to turn up our own inner nudges? And how can we move more quickly toward our own new doorways of possibility? Well, that's what we're talking about today. Our guest is Emily Freeman. She's the Wall Street Journal best-selling author of 5 books, including How to Walk Into a Room and The Next Right Thing. She's also a spiritual director, workshop leader, and host of the Next Right Thing podcast. And her most important work is to help create soul space and offer spiritual companionship and discernment for anyone struggling with decision fatigue. 3 key things we will learn are the powerful 2-word mantra to help you approach difficult decisions, the liberating question that could realign your life's path with true happiness, and a few powerful rituals that can guide you to personal closure, even when others leave the story unresolved. Before we go deep today, I want to give you a little gift, and I want to give it to you every single day. It's called the Morning Mind Love. I know how life can be. You're all fired up after an inspiring episode, and then a new day or a new challenge comes at you, and it's just hard to keep up that energy. Well, the Morning Mind Love is kind of like an oracle from your higher self to help you start each day with a positive focus. Plus, when you sign up, you get 2 free gifts, a 30-minute binaural meditation and 30 days of journaling prompts to help you remember who you truly are. And it's all completely free. So join over 9,000 people and go to mindlove.com to sign up or text the word morning to 33777.
I was so torn up about the ending of a particular friendship. This was years ago, very similar to your story. Like it ended and I didn't know why. It was like we were friends and then we weren't. And I'm like, I carried it for probably several years. Like, well, I probably did something wrong because that's what some of us do that. Others of us might just throw the blame on someone else. Like, I think it depends on our personality. But mine was like, well, I did something wrong. So should I apologize? I remember my mentor being like, but like, what would you apologize for? Like, can you put it in a sentence? Well, no, but just probably like, everything. I'll just do like a blanket apology. And I remember her saying to me one time, she said, Emily, because I was like, I don't know what I did. And I wish I could just figure it out and be understood. And like, if I knew what I did, then I could explain it and I could apologize for it. I could take it back. She was like, Emily, what if there is no story? What if it just is?
Turn up your frequency with Mind Love. Bite-sized brain hacks for seekers, dreamers, and doers. It's time to give your mind a little love with your host, Melissa Monti.
So I love your book. I feel like it's so important. I did an interview with Annie Duke years back on basically reframing quitting because it's like, oh, winners never quit, things like that. And it's like, no, actually, there's a good time to quit. And this reminds me of that topic. And it's been so long since we've covered it. So what inspired you to really encourage us to be okay with letting things go when it's time?
Well, I've been talking about decision making in general for many years now. I have a podcast called The Next Right Thing, which, by the way, is not a phrase that I came up with, but it's one that I've borrowed and has been really life changing for me, for many, many people who came before me. But what I've discovered in conversations with people around the podcast and even a book that, I had come out around the same name. So I talk with a lot of people about decision making. And what I've discovered is the decisions that tend to give us the most trouble a lot of times are around this question of, should I stay or should I go? Is it time? How can I know? Is it time to quit my job? Is it time to, change vocations? Like this whole binary, what feels like a binary decision of stay or go. And I think one reason that decision is so hard, I mean, there's many, but one is because oftentimes we have a lot of identity making that is tied to our decisions to stay or go. And the reason why I wanted to have maybe a broader conversation about it in book form is because of the very thing you said, that sometimes we have this idea that it's always better to whatever fill in the blank is. Some would say it's always better to stick it out and to stay and never quit. And that depends on your particular social location and family of origin and all of the things. And then there's another story some people tell themselves, which is it's always better to, strike while the iron's hot, no matter what you've got going on, and be able to pivot and hold things lightly. And that's two different mindsets, but they both attach like morality and identity to those decisions. And what I want to submit is that what if these decisions are not things that are so intrinsically woven black or white, but is actually like as they come along, what if there was a way that we could begin to discern decision by decision, whether or not now is a time to go or stay? And sometimes you might be like, yeah, it's time to stay. And then a year later, you might be like, actually, now it's time to go. And you weren't wrong either time.
There's so much I want to dig into. It's like I want to ease people into this topic, but I have so much I want to say that's going to go deep. So here we go. I do a coaching program called Soul Strength Activation, and I really introduce the concept so people understand how it's working before we go through all of the transformative exercises. And we're just talking about the concept that I kind of combined two areas of thought from both Simon Sinek's Start With Why and James Clear's Atomic Habits. And I found that when you overlay the circles, long story short, this whole why and our how are attached to the limbic brain. And that why is really deeply identified with our identity. And the reason that I'm talking about this is you mentioned identity in this idea of should I stay or should I go? And how a lot of people identify with not being a quitter or pivoting quickly. Like that's the part of their identity. And I'm already seeing the benefit of, we know that that identity factor is connected to behavioral change, like to what drives our behavior. So it does make sense. At the same time, it makes more sense to not identify with exactly what you do in every situation because it's not going to serve you in every situation. It's more about how can you connect to that? How can you connect your identity to the bigger purpose of whatever decision making you're doing? Like, okay, well, if my big purpose is to change lives through X, Y, and Z, sometimes that requires staying and sometimes that requires pivoting. And so it's just sort of setting your North Star on a different part of the process rather than the process itself.
Absolutely. And you brought up something so important, which is Sometimes we don't identify the difference between a decision to quit and being a quitter, or the decision to stay and being a stayer. And I would say that if we are, what I would love to see us be able to do is to take it out from like the central core of who we are and put it out kind of in a neutral space. Like, let's put it on the table. And there are practices that we can engage that help us separate it from our deep-seated narrative of who we are as people. And we can say, okay, let's look at this almost like, I mean, I don't know that we can ever look at our own decisions completely without feeling or without, being influenced in some way about how we feel about it. But I do think there are things we can do to detach a little bit more if I leave this space, that means I am a whatever. That's where we get so tripped up. And I think you're right on the money there. And so much of it has to do with, as Brene Brown talks about, the story that we're telling ourselves, the narratives that we have around quitting, and the narratives we have around staying, and what they mean for the people who we are.
Right, because we are meaning-making machines. That's what seems to be what I'm constantly guiding people through is the suffering around what is never about what is. It's about the meaning that we're giving it. And especially when we're making the meaning about ourselves, what we're capable of, what we can do in this world. And your book is called How to Walk Out of a Room. And so I love the way you use rooms as sort of a metaphor for whether it's a phase in life. Tell us about those rooms and how you say that each of these rooms sort of have their own scripts in shaping our behaviors.
Well, it's funny. You mentioned the title of the book. It's actually How to Walk into a Room. But the funny thing is that we almost called it How to Walk Out of a Room. Like for about a month, it was called How to Walk Out of a Room. And then we all got around the table and we were like, that feels a little negative. I'm feeling like, hey, everyone, here's how to leave. And it's funny though, because really the 2/3 of the book is how to walk out, is how do I do this in a way where I'm not, everything doesn't crumble around me. How is there a way to leave our spaces that isn't either, well, is there a way to exist in our spaces? Let's put it this way, that isn't either me remaining silent and suffering and staying at all cost, or burning all the bridges and raising hell on the way out? Like, is there a third way to do this? And I wanted to explore that. But you mentioned the room analogy, which is, if someone doesn't think in metaphor, come sit around my table. Let us sit here together and think about life as a house. And this is just kind of an overarching metaphor that I think about, a lot, is I think in pictures. And one of the pictures I think that we can probably all somewhat relate to is that if life were a house, then every room of the house tells a different story, and every room of the house might represent a different part of our life. It could be this room is our job, and then over there is our family, and over there is, where we went to college. And these are normal, natural rooms that we come in and out of all the time. And we understand the healthy human rhythm of leaving rooms and finding new ones when it comes to anticipated endings. And what I mean by that are like the graduations, the weddings, sometimes even the funerals, which can take us by surprise, but sometimes, there's something that can be anticipated. These are the endings that we circle on our calendar oftentimes. These are the times that we often celebrate and toast and have a party, the birthdays and the anniversaries. And so we understand those. But I think that the types of endings that I think can trip us up a lot are the ones where two types. One is the surprise endings, where we might show up in a room and be kicked right out because we told the truth. Or we were in a room we thought we'd be in for a really long time. Maybe it was a community of faith or a job that we loved. And something happens and we get fired or we get ostracized for whatever reason. And now here we are in a hallway. And all this time we thought we were going to be in that room forever. And then finally, there's a third type of ending that can also be troubling for some of us. And those are the ones where we need to discern, or it's a chosen ending, where I'm standing there with the question, like, I'm in a room and I've been in this room a while. It might even be a room I fought for, went to college for, tried really hard to get into, and maybe was accepted into. And it was one that a lot of people want to be in. Could be the, room of a certain vocation or a certain job opportunity that you fought for. But then something begins to shift. There's a conversation had, or just over time, the culture that happens in the room is just a different vibe than what you thought it would be or what it was when you got there. And you begin to ask yourself questions about that room. And so that's where I hope to provide some guidelines, some framework that will help people begin to, okay, what are the questions I can ask myself if there's a room of my life that maybe has taken me by surprise, or maybe I'm discerning is now the time to walk away.
You know what's funny? We spend so much time feeding our minds, reading books, listening to podcasts, learning new things, but then we grab whatever's convenient to feed our bodies. And I get it. Life is busy, and sometimes a drive-through feels like the only option. But that's why I take Field of Greens. It's a greens powder made with whole organic fruits and vegetables. No extracts, no lab-made stuff, and just 1 scoop a day gives you simple, real nutrition. Field of Greens feeds your body with fruits and vegetables medically chosen to support your heart, vital organs, and immune system. And let me tell you something. Since I started taking it, I've noticed these little changes that show me how nutrient depleted I must have been before. Like the ridges in my nails, gone. My sleep, so much better. And my stomach just feels happy. You know that dreaded afternoon crash that has you reaching for more coffee or sugary snacks? Well, that's not happening for me anymore. When your body is actually nourished, it runs so much better. I've tried other greens powders before, but Field of Greens is genuinely different. The quality is next level and you can taste it. It's become my go-to, especially on those days when my eating isn't exactly Instagram worthy, because we all have those days, right? And here's the thing. They are so confident that you'll love it too, that they offer a 100% money-back guarantee. That's how much they believe in their product. So I got you 15% off your first order and free rush shipping. Visit fieldofgreens.com and use promo code MINDLOVE. That's promo code MINDLOVE at fieldofgreens.com. fieldofgreens.com. I don't know why it took me so long to invest in good bedding. I resisted it for years, but something flipped in me about 3 years ago. And now I'm basically a pillow connoisseur. I've tried them all, and I get weirdly excited about good bedding. Because here's the thing, we spend a third of our lives in bed, and the quality of that time affects literally everything else, which is why I'm so excited to tell you about my latest obsession, Lagoon Sleep Pillows. What sets them apart is their matching system. You take a quick 2-minute quiz about your sleep style and your preferences, and then they match you with your perfect pillow. I was matched with their Otter pillow, and I am so impressed. Lately, I've just needed more support, and this seems to cradle me in all the right places. I'm also low-key obsessed with their travel pillow, which I use for way more than just travel. I actually hug it, use it as leg support, and of course, take it on trips with me. Well, the secret is in their adjustable fill. You can add or remove it to get that perfect alignment for your spine. A study even found that the right supportive pillow can improve sleep quality by 63%. And Lagoon lets you try their matched pillow for 100 nights risk-free. Free returns, no questions asked. Falling asleep has never been easier. I toss and turn less and just wake up feeling refreshed every morning. Go to lagoonsleep.com and take their awesome 2-minute sleep quiz to find your match. Use the code MIND for 15% off your first purchase. And that's so needed. I reflect back on my life, and I went through a period of time where I stayed no matter what. And that includes relationships. I was going to say jobs in there, but nope. I was one of those people. I'm like, 8 months is good. Let's move on to the next one. But yes, relationships, especially. And as you said, when you feel like you really earned that, it's really hard to let it go because they use all those psychological tactics of scarcity and urgency and exclusivity. And so then once you're in, you're like, well, if I get out, will I ever make it back in again? Not considering the idea that, do I want to be trapped?
Do I want to be? Exactly. Such an important question.
And then as I began to evolve, I really started to understand I need to let go of people, patterns, places, jobs, and I started to intentionally craft my life. And I'm looking back at that beginning part of when I did that, where I'm just like, okay, I'm growing out of you. I'm growing out of this. This doesn't feel good. And it was like, there's this meme where there's like this crazy little girl with wide eyes and there's a burning house behind her. It reminds me of me during this period, just like throw the match at it. And one thing I've really admired about my husband is that he has never really burned a bridge ever in his life. And now it's really coming full circle. A lot of things like needing help in certain areas, company growing. And I look and I'm like, oh, I wish I had that foresight back then. And so now I'm in a state of awareness where I just think I'm a better
a more evolved person. I can actually focus on these things instead of just being in my survival mode. So I'll give myself grace for that. But it is a point where I have to intentionally craft new ways of being. And so I love that you have a sort of guide. You use the PRAY acronym to guiding people towards navigating life decisions. Tell us about that.
Well, first, I love your phrase of intentionally crafting your life because I don't know that we often think that we have that option. But we all have some form of agency, some of us more than others. But when it comes to the life that we're living, what are some ways that we can raise the level of intentionality so that I can put myself in the path of myself? So that I'm living the life that I long for and that I'm meant to live rather than someone else's life. And that's a question that we can often ask when we're standing at in a threshold of a room where we're like, do I stay or do I walk on all the way out? And so the PRAY acronym is just a very simple 4-part movement that I have found kind of slows me down to the pace of life rather than thinking like, should I stay or go? Must make a decision now. So it sort of gives us a little bit more time. And I'll briefly share what those 4 are. The P stands for point and call. You mentioned James Clear's book, Atomic Habits, and in there he mentions the Japanese railway system, how it is the safest in the world, thanks to a safety system that they have implemented called pointing and calling, which is really just where the railway workers look at all the function of the train and what's happening on the train, and they simply point at it, signal is green, and they call it out loud. Signal is green. They point at the speed and they call it out loud. And it almost sounds like something a toddler would do, like when they're playing, like there's a ball, there's a dog, but this has actually reduced workplace errors by 85%. It is the safest railway system in the world. And the same way they do that for keeping the train safe, I think we can do that for our inner life and the rooms of our life. And we can look around and say, okay, I'm questioning this room, or maybe I don't know if I'm questioning it or not, but are there things I can do here to point and call? And so there are some questions you can ask yourself, like, for example, not to decide to go or not, but simply to state what's true. Like, for example, what in this room am I avoiding, if anything? What is good and beautiful about this room? Because that's why this is hard, because there are beautiful things about the room. And who is in this room with me? Who has already left? Who has the power here? Is it me? If I leave, who will be impacted? If I stay, who will be impacted? So there are many questions we can ask without judgment to begin to point and call at what's actually true. So that's the P. And then the R is remember your path. So often when we are trying to make a decision, we're really focused on the future. Like, what should I do next? But I would like to submit that oftentimes our biggest teachers of our future decisions are really decisions we've already made. And so rather than trying to look through the foggy future at what the path is before me, find ways to reflect and look at the path I've already traveled. And one way to do this is I ask myself 2 questions. What in my life or in this room has been truly life-giving? And what has been life-draining? And can I write those things down? Again, it's sort of another way of pointing and calling, but it's doing it specifically with where I've come so far. And that can be a way of helping me know and name, okay, well, here's what some of my core values are. Here are the things that matter most to me. And those things matter to those people over there, and those aren't bad things, but those aren't my things. And I think remembering our path and what's meant something to us along the way can be a way to do that. The A stands for acknowledge presence. And this is both the presence of God with you or divine love, however you might want to language God, higher power. Also the presence of people who know and love you. Are there people you can talk to and lean on in this space? And I want to also emphasize the presence of someone that we often forget, which is our very own selves. I have found it to be true that sometimes I forget to allow my voice to be one at the table that has agency and say. I think of poet and theologian Padraig Otuma, who says, we might know more than we know we know. And I think acknowledging presence is a part of that, including my own. And then finally, the final movement that really is more of a movement than the other 3 is to yield to the arrows. And what I mean by that is simply, oftentimes we have a question. The thing we want more than anything else is an answer. Should I stay or should I go? Yes or no? But instead what we get is maybe a series of answers where it's not an exact, a series of arrows where it's not an exact answer, but it is a step in a direction, maybe one next right thing. And so can I pay attention to my surroundings, my longings, the people who know and love me? And while I might not know where I'm going to end up, I can do just one next right thing today.
There's so much gold in there. So I'm going to break it down one by one. I love the pointing and calling. It reminds me of so many different things that have helped me. And we think that we have more awareness than we really do because we're like,
Right.
of course I know these things. But I am constantly sharing that one of the best tools that helped me finally start to move through bulimia back when I had bulimia for about 10 years was naming it and talking to it out loud. And in doing that, I could hear how irrational everything was. Whereas otherwise, it's like there was this other voice, and it's like I wouldn't necessarily be acknowledging what I was doing. I would be have just this soft voice justifying everything that I was doing until I started to say out loud, you're going to eat this and you're going to say it's just one, but it's going to trigger something. You're going to go down a rabbit hole. You're going to keep doing it. Then you're going to feel like you've gone too far. And it was like I could see the pattern just that repeated itself every single time. And without that, I just couldn't see my behaviors for what they were. And I know that's not the exact same context of this, but it does speak to the fact that, as I said, we believe ourselves to have more awareness than we really do. And that self-awareness is such a big part of it. And I'm wondering, while we're doing that process, oftentimes people end up when they start to pay attention to something, I'm thinking of specific people here, but and myself, where it's like, okay, well now I've got this on my mind, and so all of the things that I bring awareness to are confirming my own bias of the situation. But what you share about is an approach of paying attention without seeking definite answers. And I think that there is so much value of this, even beyond decision making, just in our lives. So tell us what that looks like.
It is so counterintuitive to point at something and then not do something with it. I mean, I don't know if it's a Western thing. I've only ever lived in the West, so I can't speak for that. But I have a hunch it might be, which is, oh, we identify a problem, fix it, fix it. And to sit with something that we might recognize, and we might name a problem, even naming it a problem is maybe problem in and of itself, because maybe it's not a problem, maybe it just is. And maybe for someone else that would be a solution, or that would be a gift and they would love it, but we've been naming it problematic this whole time. And so it is extremely counterintuitive. And you're right, sometimes it's tempting. And I think your point about it's so good. Your point about we think we're more aware than we actually are. We have more self-awareness than we actually do. Because I think at first in this process of pointing and calling, we might first recognize the things that kind of confirm our own bias. But if we're honest in the practice, what will have to happen is we continue to, and I give 10 questions that you can ask yourself. So you don't just have to, come up with the questions, but you continue to pay attention to things that even the question itself is one you just never would have asked. And so it's hard to confirm your own bias in a question that you've never considered. And I think that's an important part of this process. And again, allowing yourself to not go from identifying a problem to fixing it, and that yield to the arrows is the final movement. And even that's not an answer. I know the answer people are turning us off right now because they're like, this is too slow. But there's something slow. Like I think about our nervous system, and I'm not a doctor, a medical doctor, or a psychiatrist, but I have learned a little bit about the pace of our nervous system, and it is much slower than the pace of that I'm talking right now, than the pace of things that we experience. And so there is something really beautiful, and I think maybe even mysterious, of slowing down our discernment process to maybe match a little bit more with the pace of our nervous system, and see if we can get all the parts of ourselves online as we consider these decisions.
That's one of the main goals of meditation, is actually learning to just be aware of your thoughts without attaching to them, giving them meaning, ruminating on the story behind them. And so this is basically a meditative practice in real life.
It really is. It is, and it's a meditative practice for people who maybe don't think they meditate. You might be like, "Oh, I can't do that sitting in silence." Like, well, how about this little small activity? Can we do this? This one small thing.
So you talk about different types of endings as well: anticipated, forced, and chosen. Can you elaborate on what those different types of endings are? Some of them are kind of obvious, but how does it affect the way we humans tend to move through them?
I think the reason why it matters to define these different types of endings is because it's sort of tied into our idea of closure. So for an anticipated ending are those ones that we sort of mentioned before, like the things that we can circle on the calendar, the things that culturally and communally we've all decided, yeah, this thing is over, and we're going to mark it either with a party, a celebration, a time of grief, whatever it is. But we've all decided together that this is over. And that can really help when it comes to putting a bow on it, putting a period on it, and moving on. Let's just say moving forward and knowing that that thing is done. And I think when it comes to forced endings, those ones that take us by surprise, that maybe we had hoped to stay here longer, this relationship, this job, this community of people, and sometimes we're surprised. Closure can look really funky there because a lot of times we think that in order to have closure, we need to understand the why of something. I think that's a myth. I don't think that's true. But I do think that's how we feel, is that like, this is just an open gaping wound because this is not how I imagined it would end. I didn't imagine it would end at all. And so recognizing and naming what type of ending it is, if it was a forced ending, a surprised ending, it's really important to know for how you move through and experience it. And then the discerned endings come with a different set of responsibilities because these are the things that kind of are on our shoulders. These are the things that we are actually having to decide yes or no, now or later, stay or go. And there are different things we consider when it comes to that. And then, of course, there are different types of anticipated regret that we might have, like, oh, well, if I choose this, then this is going to happen maybe. Or if I don't, then this, and it's all on me. And so that's a different type of experience of an ending that we might have. But the reason I bring closure into it is there's a real difference between ending and closure. And I think closure is a luxury. And if you get it, take it and run. I mean, yay, you. Cheers and have a toast and throw a party because it happens so seldom that we actually get the closure that we think we want, the closure that we feel like an experience deserved. But sometimes we always get endings. Closure's a luxury. And so the endings that we get, I think we can learn to find the closure that we need in them. But I think the first step of that is naming what kind of ending was this? Was it anticipated? Was it forced? Or was it something that I decided?
At Sierra, discover top workout gear at incredible prices, which might lead to another discovery. Your headphones haven't been connected this whole time. Awkward. Discover top brands at unexpectedly low prices. Sierra, let's get moving.
Time to move? Skip the hassles of selling during the holiday season and sell your home directly to Opendoor. Request an all-cash offer in minutes, close, and get paid in days. You can even pick your close date so you can move after New Year's. Start your move at opendoor.com or download the Opendoor app. Opendoor is represented by Opendoor Brokerage Inc., license 02061130 in California, and Opendoor Brokerage LLC in its other markets. Terms and conditions apply.
I can see the value in that. I am having like flashbacks of my life. And it's funny, there's been certain friendships that have ended and that have marked periods of time in my life. Like there was one, it was a best friend from like 4th grade through college. And I still don't know why our friendship ended. Like we had a good phone conversation and then I found out she moved back to our state and I found out by running into her at her place of work and she just like never talked to me again. No idea what happened. That was 20 years ago. I still have one dream about it a month at least. And then there were friendships in my 20s where I was clear, like I said, I was growing out of them. And one that I know I needed to cut off, another one that I thought I knew I needed to cut off. And now we've sort of rekindled. And I look back and I'm like, oh, that was a time I think I threw a match back and I should have just allowed us to ebb and flow. But what they all have in common is that I made the meaning about me. And I just decided a couple months ago, Melissa, you know the tools for this. You need to work through it. And so I had to do what I usually do of when I'm trying to break through a belief that I can feel just keeps persisting. And I had to just sit there and log all the evidence that I have for not being a bad friend. Like for some reason, I'm like, oh, when people get to know me too much, that's when maybe the veil drops or something like that. Maybe I'm not as good in a long-term relationship. People think I'm going to be some way and then I'm not. And I made all this meaning about myself. And a couple of years back, it was actually quite a while ago now, I had a birthday dinner and I invited some people. And when birthdays come around, I get a lot of those feelings like, who's going to show up? I hope I'm not asking too much of people, whatever. A bunch of my really good friends came through. One person brought his girlfriend and they were going around saying something nice about me. It was really sweet. And she's like, well, I don't know you super well, but I'm very impressed at how many past roommates are here. That tells me that you're a really good friend. And I should actually reach out to her because I don't think she knows how much that just like broke me open. I needed to hear that. I needed to point and call that part of my life instead of placing so much emphasis on like 3 friendships in a 38-year time fallen away. But they were my best friendships. And so I think that's why it was so difficult. And so you also mention how these endings prompt questions about belonging and discernment. And those things popped up, both of those topics. Like, am I really worthy of belonging with people? Do I make good decisions around friendships? And so those 2 things. So how do you recommend that people maybe avoid the 20-year suffering I put myself through before I decided to workshop this?
Well, you just so beautifully illustrated that with the lack of information, we fill it in with bad things. And it usually has to do with us. And oftentimes the story is one of either shame, anger, or fear. And that's what we do. That's just like how humans work. No one sat down and taught us that in first grade. We just do that. And so what we're trying to do is what we have to learn to teach is the opposite of the screensaver, which is this is the automatic thing is shame, anger, or fear. So therefore, how can I work against that and counterbalance? And I think one way to begin to do that is to really truly begin to believe in our bones that an ending does not get to define the whole story. And you talked about these long friendships that you had from 4th grade until college, this friendship, and this was many, many years of your life. And because it ended weird with some ambiguity and some like question marks, it feels like it's colored the whole darn thing. Like, and so much so that it shows up in dreams. I mean, our dreams are so informative. They may not that they like necessarily give us like information that we have to dissect, but I do think how we feel when we wake up from a dream is like really informative. Like it's a piece of information. And it's funny that you brought up friendships because when I have had the conversation about leaving rooms and finding new ones and endings that don't have closure and how can we kind of bless the ending we get and not demand the ending that was impossible for us, so many people bring up friendships. And a lot of people have a lot of friendship pain that's sort of just like hanging out around there because I don't know that we have a lot of vocabulary or like models for how to friend well, especially as grownups. Like, how do we do this? And what about friendship breakups? And I mean, I think Laura Tremaine, she wrote a book about the Life Council. It's called The Life Council, a book about friendship. And I mean, I remember having a conversation with her and thinking like, oh, this needs to be talked about all the time. Like, this is not something we talk about. It's the relationships that are so important to us, but it's not romantic. And so therefore it doesn't get as much airtime. But I do think that beginning to know and name and really have it be part of our ethos that the ending doesn't get to define the whole story, that there's it is a plot point and it does matter, but it's not the whole thing. And if there's a way to begin when we're leaving a room or when someone left us behind, when someone left a room and here we are standing in it without them, I find it helpful to actually, I mean, I'm a list girl, so I like to make some lists. And 2 of the lists I make when an ending comes like this or relationship ends is to say, okay, what are the gifts that I'm bringing with me as I leave this room or that I'm picking up as I'm still in this room, and write them down, like the gifts of the room. Even terrible rooms had some gifts. They did. And so being able to name those, it's another form of pointing and calling. And then also writing down, equally as important, is what are the things in this room that I cannot take with me? Because a lot of times something that I try to take with me after the end of a relationship, for example, is I try to take with me the whole story. I try to take with me being understood fully. I try to take like an explanation that I'm never going to get to say, and conversations that were had about me when I wasn't in the room. And I'm like trying to put them in my suitcase and like, I can bring this and I can control this. And I'm here to tell you that stuff doesn't fit through the door. We have to leave it behind. And as I begin to name those and like literally with my hand, write them down in a journal, it's like it loses just a small bit of its power. And then I can counterbalance that with, but here are the gifts of that room, the gifts of that relationship. And sometimes the gift is the person who you have become as a result of it that you never would have become if you hadn't been in that room in the first place.
I made a whole face when you said being understood fully, because it's something I can relate to so much. A friend and I were discussing how we tend to over-explain sometimes because we have such a need or a desire, a yearning to be understood. And we traced it back to never really feeling understood growing up.
Yep.
And then that opened up another discussion of, is it even possible to fully understand somebody? And I think that made it lose some of its power, because I'm like, well, yes, of course I over-explain. It's something that I'm going to work on, but it's touching on a childhood wound. So of course it's there. And then I'm like, okay, but that wound is never going to heal if you are still looking for something in adulthood to give you the same thing. That may be impossible, because I also think it might actually be impossible to fully understand ourselves. We're so complex, and we're always giving meaning, and we're looking at everything through tinted glasses of our beliefs, our experiences, how we want to see things, how we want to be seen. And so there is such beauty in, even just for a moment, I have not been able to make this my whole worldview, but when I can pop into the, let it be okay as it is. Maybe you don't understand. Maybe there's just always opportunity to unfold, and that's the beauty of life. So just understand what you want to understand right now, what you like, leave it open, see how it is if you experience it without attaching to any of this meaning. And every time, even right now, just opening up this idea, I feel lighter. I feel fluid. It's like my hard candy shell melts off, and I'm just sort of one with the moment.
I love that.
And I see something else and I give that meaning, and we're out.
I know. And we're starting again. Well, speaking of friendship, I remember talking with a mentor of mine, and I mean, I was so torn up about the ending of a particular friendship. This was years ago, very similar to your story. Like it ended and I didn't know why. It was like we were friends and then we weren't. And I'm like, I carried it for probably several years. Like, well, I probably did something wrong, because that's what some of us do that. Others of us might just throw the blame on someone else. Like, I think it depends on our personality. But mine was like, well, I did something wrong. So should I apologize? And I remember my mentor being like, I mean, but like, what would you apologize for? Like, can you put it in a sentence? Well, no, but just probably like everything. I'll just do like a blanket apology. And I remember her saying to me one time, she said, Emily, because I was like, I don't know what I did, and I wish I could just figure it out and be understood. And like, if I knew what I did, then I could explain it and I could apologize for it. I could take it back. She was like, Emily, what if there is no story? What if it just is? And it was deeply unsatisfying at the moment when she said that. I was like, I don't like any of those words you just said. But I'll tell you, that was the beginning for me of finding an imperfect closure. It's not the closure that I wanted. The closure I wanted was, we're going to sit down and she's going to tell me everything that I did wrong. And then I'm going to make it all right. And we're going to hug and it's going to be fine. And I'm going to feel good. And I'm going to stop having dreams, because I also had dreams about this particular friend. But instead, that like, what if there is no storyline, started to work its way in me. And it was a slow closure. But I can say with confidence now, I have found closure in that. It's imperfect, it's lopsided, it's a little leaky, but there it is. And I can bless the ending. And I can also now, even like somehow miraculously, look at the person who I have become as a result of that interpersonal conflict. Honestly, it's made me like, I hate to say it's made me stronger, because that's so cliche, but cliches are cliches for a reason. It's because there's some truth in them. It's just, we have to attach story to it to give it some oomph and some meaning, some specificity. And I do think it's helped me learn like, oh, not everything's about me. Actually, the world does not revolve around me. And there's some real relief in finally being able to realize that.
Yeah, closure's a big one. I have been trying to get closure on a couple things for quite a while. And one of the things that I like that you share about is the role of rituals in marking endings, because I feel like this could really help people get that closure, because we often think that closure needs to include the other person. Like the other person needs to be okay, off little pony, run into the field. And you're just like, but wait, she's not here to say this closure is okay. So how do I give it to myself? And I found that anything that involves the behavior of another person to give ourselves our own inner peace is probably going about it the wrong way, because then you're relying on somebody else for your own peace. We need to be able to find that regardless of what happens. I remember hearing a story a long time ago when I was thinking about having one of those conversations with the third friend I mentioned, the ones where I think I threw the fire too fast. And now I'm like, things are good with us now, but we're not as close as we used to be. And I kind of have some, not regrets, because I don't believe in regrets, but I have a desire to rekindle that now, is that what I'll call it. Anyways, expecting a certain thing from a conversation when you go have a conversation with somebody, and trusting that if you show up fully with your intention on one side, and even if the other person is like, no, screw you, I still think you're a horrible person, trusting that that moment was needed for both of you. Maybe for me to strengthen my ability to find that closure despite the reaction of somebody else. Maybe who knows what's in it for that person, but it's all by divine design. So just trust, like maybe they'll come around later. Maybe they never will. Maybe you're just not meant to be in each other's lives. Maybe this was a huge learning lesson for every single person involved, including the woman walking her dog across the street that happened to see the whole thing. So all that to say, what are the different types of rituals that you describe that doesn't involve putting on a witch's cape and mixing together leaves to send someone off?
That might work for some. That might work.
I can see it working for me.
But I would say, ritual's a funny word, and we all have different narratives we attach just even to that word. You just named a few, but I think really it's to me what it is. The simplest way I can describe what I mean by ritual when I say it here is just how can I put a period on this? What is an action I can take? Almost an action, I would say usually it's bodily, like an embodied experience, where I can say this thing was, and it is no longer in whatever form, or it's not the same as it was. There has been a change here. And so a way to put a period on the experience. I find that engaging the elements like earth, wind, water, fire, thinking in those terms, those kind of categories can be helpful when it comes to ritual. For example, sometimes I think for example, if there was a loss, a lot of people will light a candle, sort of in honor of that loss. That's a tiny ritual. It's sort of one that we all are familiar with. Other times, if there's a breakup, we all probably are familiar with have your girlfriends over and you burn some things in a fire. That's a ritual. And to make it a thing can actually be really soothing and really satisfying depending on your personality. Other times you might need more of a water ritual where you want to, even just honestly, a tiny ritual, taking a shower to just change something of the day. That can be a tiny ritual at the end of the day that we do. This day is over and I need a tiny ritual to mark it. I'm gonna take a shower. Water can make a big difference in so many ways, whether it's the water that we immerse ourselves in or the water that comes out from our eyes. There's a lot of water rituals we can engage that I think can be really helpful. Another ritual that I engage is 2-word mantras. And by mantra, I just mean 2 words put together that I can repeat over time. And any 2 words can be a mantra, but for me, one that I engage a lot as sort of rhythmically or ritualistically is the 2 words for now. And this can be really helpful to kind of bring me into this right now space of for example, I have 3 kids, 2 20-year-olds and a 17-year-old. And listen, we have made it almost through the teenage years, and it is a whole success. Let me just tell you, but still there. And so oftentimes I have to say to myself, oh, my kids are struggling. And that's the sentence that comes out of my mouth. But I add the 2-word mantra, my kids are struggling for now. And that helps me remember, they're not going to be struggling forever. This is not our life sentence, but for now, this is what's true. And I think that 2-word mantra, kind of adopting whatever 2 words might fit for your experience. It might be something like me too, or not yet, or let go. There's lots of 2 words that I think can make it really easy that you add on to a sentence that is really maybe was formerly a struggle.
My mantra for 2024 is let it be easy. And I thought it was just going to be a week. It was something I was focusing on for a week. And I was like, no, the whole year, because I've found that I thought it was just moving me through one specific struggle, but I can apply it to almost everything. There was just the other day where I was stressed out. I was like, oh, I didn't finish what I wanted to do today. Now I've got to make dinner. My kids are yelling. And I could feel myself tense, and it was affecting my mood and how I was reacting. And my little mantra popped in, flew through my brain. Let it be easy. And it was just like, this is a moment of my life. This is a moment that I could look back on and feel joy over. And I'm instead attaching struggle to it. And that can apply to everything from these rooms that we're walking into, rooms that we're walking out of. I know so many people deal with social anxiety, and before they go in a room, they're concerned about all these things. How can I let this be easy? What would that look like? It's like it calls out your own authenticity because you stop trying and you just be. And then the same thing with walking out of a room. Like, how can I let this be easy? It makes me less likely to want to throw the match backwards or to want to create all this meaning on why I absolutely had to get out. And it's just like, we're both moving on. Wish them peace and love, and let me walk this way. But I love that mantra. So if anybody's hearing this and they're like, oh, I'm going to take it, do it, because it has been life-changing for me.
Beautiful. I used to let this be easy. I've used that too. I think 2019 was my let this be easy year. And it was a great year in many ways because of it, just for all the reasons you said.
So tell me about the difference of the process of achieving closure and how it might differ from something like an anticipated ending versus a forced ending.
Well, I think when it's a forced ending, we feel like we were robbed of closure because none of us ever plan on or imagine closure to be disruptive. Closure is a word that feels like a final note in a musical, or like it's like, and we're all satisfied. It's like we've waited for this. And so a surprised or a forced ending is like the opposite of that. It's like something is taken from you, it feels like. And so that feeling or that experience of what we would call closure it's not even in the room, like literally or figuratively. It's just like not a part of our experience at all. Whereas I think when it comes to an anticipated ending, I think we have maybe we have a little bit more agency over how we experience closure, only because of the fact that we're the ones deciding to leave or stay, or to end this thing or not. And so we might have a little bit more say in how it ends, which means we also have some say in how the closure feels. I'll even challenge my own word with closure. I think it was John O'Donohue, who was an Irish poet. I'm quoting a lot of poets today. But he talks about, rather than closure, he talks about completion, and how can we really say closure? Like when so much of our lives are cyclical, like you look at the seasons and they're cyclical, and our bodies have a circulatory system, and it's like things are changing, but they're never really finished. And closure kind of implies an ending that is like finished, the end, it's over. And there are just so few things in life that end that way. And so I like his kind of reimagination of this idea of completion. Like, even if it's a surprised ending or a forced ending, we can say, well, it's not complete in the definition I would like, which would be maybe more of a wholeness, but it's complete in the definition of, well, it's over and now it's time for something else, even if it's not what I would have chosen.
I love the metaphor you used or comparing it to the final note in a song. All of a sudden I had all these visuals because I create meditations, and I'm always trying to like, can I find a song that's exactly this length? Because it is so satisfying when it ends. And then I'm thinking of my toddler, who I'll be listening to a good song on our Alexa, and then he's like, go play Bulldozer by Blippi. And I'm like, no, it's like right in the middle of it. I hate. I really can feel my energy wanting to go back, and he will not let me switch the song back. But you know what? This idea of creating our own closure is just like being okay with the fade out. It might be the final note, but at least it tapers you off. At least your toddler isn't stealing your energy at the moment. So I found that really helpful. But there's also something that around this idea of yielding to the arrows. And it's such a big thing that I teach in following the cues from life. And I think this has been the most impactful thing that I have learned to really listen to, is learning to listen to my body, my intuition. And I found that the more that I follow those cues, it's like they're just laid out for me. Before, I'm like, how do I discern between my fear and my intuition? How do I know? Like, is this a sign? Is like, that's how it felt like when it started. And now I'm just like, clear sign, going this way. And I used to be like, well, let me see if it shows up again and again, maybe that's a sign. And so I would wait too long, but then every process was almost like this period of stress. Whereas now it's just, it feels clear. And I remember somebody telling me on episode 2 of this podcast, and I created this little, I like edited it in a certain way because she's like, and then eventually if you listen to those clues, you'll just start to realize they're always there. God will give you more of them. The universe will give you more of them, however you decide to look at it. And then you just start to feel guided. So every time it happens, I hear guided.
I love that.
But what are your tips for getting to that place? Maybe shortening that period of time, because it took me 10 years to get there. How do you feel guided?
I love, now I'm going to hear that in my head forever. Thank you, Melissa, for that little mantra. Well, what you're talking about is this idea of clarity. And how can I get clear on the direction? How can I know it's clarity, or if it's not just what I want to do and maybe it's not the right thing, blah, blah, blah. And we can get stuck in these stories. Marie Forleo, who's an entrepreneur and writer and author speaker, she has so much wisdom to share when it comes to clarity. And there's 2 things she says about clarity that I've never forgotten. The first is, she says, clarity cannot be rushed. And so many times, I think when we have a decision to make, or like, what am I going to do? I'm looking for the answer. I'm even looking for the arrows. And we're trying to like hurry it along because we don't like, I don't know if you've met humans, but we don't like to hold tension of an unmade decision. We want to know, like, what's my next right thing right now to do in a direction. But we can't rush clarity. We almost sometimes have to wait for that guided response, right? The second thing she says about clarity is almost sounds the opposite of that, which is clarity does not come from thought, it comes from engagement. And so what that is just what you said. It's kind of moving in the direction that you're engaging it. You're trusting that, this way that I feel compelled to go, when I pay attention to all the cues, when I've pointed and called, when I've paid attention to my people, when I'm not denying my core values, I'm actually working to move in alignment with like who I am and what I long for. And I'm going to take a step in a direction. Am I 100% clearly sure it's right? Of course not. I'm a human person. However, engaging that, even if you're moving in a direction that's not great, engagement will bring clarity sooner than sitting around and thinking about the clarity and whether or not this is the right move. So I think those 2 things, you can't rush clarity, and also it comes from engagement. Those 2 things, almost like, 2 steps of a walk, have been so helpful for me when it comes to that very question you ask.
I love that quote. I actually had a whole email series a couple months back on action, or clarity is actually the reward. Clarity and confidence are the reward of action. And we're so often trying to get it through rumination. And that just muddles it even more, because you can create infinite possibilities with your mind.
Yeah.
And an idea that I've been playing with in my life is, what if you can't choose wrong? What if no matter what, how does that take the pressure off? Where, yeah, maybe you look back and you're like, I wish I would have picked this, but what lessons would you have missed? And maybe you needed these lessons in order to choose right. And so it's just like that. Any entrepreneur has probably seen that graph of like the journey of an entrepreneur, and it's like all these ups and downs, but overall it's moving upward. We just expect it to be this straight line, and so we have a dip and we think it's failure, but it's not. You just have to be okay that it's going to be dips and ups, but know that the trend is going up. It's like Bitcoin,
Yeah. That's good.
Or look at your long-term investments. Most of them, it's like, yeah, oh gosh, it crashed, let me pull out. No, just stay in. It's going to go up.
Stay in long term.
And so that has really helped me in the decision-making process, because I used to wear procrastination and indecision as like these badges of honor. And then somebody once told me that indecision was a form of pain, and so is procrastination. But what I have found, and this is something that I've been drilling into my clients recently, is we think that procrastination is just putting it off, and maybe we're staying where we are. But I would argue that no, you're actually moving backwards, because yeah, you might be staying where you are in terms of this one specific goal, you're building self-beliefs at that time, that you're not the type of person to take action, that you're not the type of person to follow through, that you are a procrastinator, that you are. And so I lived in that gray zone for such a long time. And when I finally started being a different way in my life, the hard part wasn't just making progress on the goals. It was actually dismantling all of those self-beliefs that I created when I refused to move forward, when I didn't trust myself to move forward. And I think that's an aspect that people often overlook.
Oh, that'll preach all day Sunday. That is so, so good. And it comes back to that identity piece, right? Like we're really not, you can't simply be standing still because you're not standing there still thinking nothing. You're standing still and forming all of these narratives in your mind about what it means that you're standing still about the person who you are. And so that dismantling process, that is so important to pay attention to and to name. I will never forget that now that you said that, because I've never really thought about procrastination in that way.
Well, I love leaving listeners with one specific thing to focus on this week to sort of ground some of these concepts into their lives, because I know that we've covered a lot. So if you were just going to give them one little growth work item, one thing to focus on, what would that be?
I think because we're talking a lot about decisions when it comes to the rooms of your life and the things that maybe you worked hard to get into, or rooms that you might be questioning, I think a lot of fear can come up of like, oh gosh, if I start pulling at that thread, what is going to become of me or of this space? And I would say specifically to someone who might be questioning a room that you worked really hard to get into, I will just say this: just because you're good at something, it doesn't mean you have to do it forever. And so maybe there's some courage in just beginning to ask yourself the question, what am I noticing about myself in this space? And see what arrows you might be able to have to follow when you ask yourself that question.
That's such a good question, because we so often do think, well, maybe this is a sign that this is what I'm supposed to do. Well, want to know what I was really great at doing? Staying up until 6 a.m. doing crap loads of Molly in my 20s. Like I was also good at binge drinking for a while. I was good at a lot of things that are very clear I should not hold on to. But just because it might be a positive trait, we think, oh, well, this is who I am. But is it who you want to be? Is it what brings you joy? And if you ask yourself those two questions and it's not who you want to be and it doesn't bring you joy, then do you want to be a person that is just repeating a behavior because other people think you're good at it, or you have skills in it, but then you're not a joyful person. So it just unravels so many other things. So thank you so much for all of the wisdom that you have around this specific topic. I just think it's something that's not always talked about enough. It's like we talk about these foundational things, but it's like, yeah, but then what? Now we're just stuck in this one life path forever. So if listeners are resonating with you and your book, How to Walk Into a Room, where you'll also learn how to walk out of one.
That's right.
Best place for them to connect.
You can find me online at emilypfreeman.com. I'm also on Instagram, Emily P. Freeman. And the book is wherever books are sold, as they say. So I would love to connect with you. And it has been a true joy to be here with you today.
All the links for this episode will be at mindlove.com/342. Your challenge for this week is twofold. Take your body element type quiz. It's super quick and highly informative. And spend some time in boredom. This has come up as a challenge in so many episodes across the board of category. Everything from enhancing your creativity to finding more stillness to connecting with your inner voice to really being in tune with your body. We need these moments of stillness where we're integrating, reflecting, just relaxing without this constant consuming of input in our lives. So do with this time what you will, but just find that time. I love to go on long walks without an audiobook or a podcast, although it seems a little counterintuitive to suggest to you guys. But even when I was working in a startup, I actually convinced our CEO to schedule in boredom time for each of us. So we'd go into the conference room alone and just lay on the floor, doodle, whatever our free time looked like. And it was really effective in enhancing the ideas that we came up together. So spend some time in boredom, take your body element type. All of my amazing sponsors are at mindlove.com/sponsors. Please find me on Instagram at mindlovemelissa. If you like the podcast, you're going to like the Instagram. There's all sorts of short tidbits to just keep your vibes high between episodes. Mind Love Melissa. If you love this episode, please take a screenshot, share it on Instagram, tag me and Mind Love Podcast, and Acupuncture Fit. And that's all for today. So thanks for giving your mind a little love today, and I'll see you next week.
Thanks for tuning into Your Higher Frequency with Mind Love. Head to mindlove.com for a free gift to keep your vibes up until next week.